Thank you, councillors. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. The council acknowledges and pays respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional owners and custodians of this land on which we live. And our prayer: may the words of our lips and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Welcome to you all. Apologies from Councillor Fuller this evening. And we'll move straight on to 1.1, the confirmation of the minutes of the October meeting. Can I have somebody move that they be? Thanks, Councillor Viney. Seconded, Councillor Hiskett. Any queries on those minutes? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 2.1 is council workshops. There's a list there. Can I have somebody move that that report be received?
So moved, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Beswick. Seconded, Councillor Overton. Any queries on any of those workshops? Not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 3.1 is Mayor's communications, and I have none. 3.2 is the Mayor's diary. There's a list there. Can I have somebody move that that be received? Thanks, Councillor Diprose. Seconded, Councillor Viney. Any queries on any of those items? If not, Councillor Carpenter, you also laid the wreath for the Remembrance Day at Penguin.
Yes.
We might add that to the minutes. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 3.3 is declarations of interest. You want any declarations of interest? No. 4.1 is councillor reports for councillors who have been appointed by the council. Councillor Carpenter.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quickly, at our last meeting at Caves to Canyon, was fortunate enough to be hosted through Hive. I've got to get used to taking the "the" out in front of it. Well and truly before it was opening, and it just from the chairman of the Caves to Canyon, Scott, wanted to pass on his congratulations to council. I think we had nearly 30 there that night, and they were thoroughly impressed on the building structure and what it's going to deliver for Central Coast. So please accept their thank you for letting them in, and congratulations to council and all the staff and everybody involved, because they was really impressed with the building.
Excellent. Thank you. No other reports? Thank you. 5.1 is leave of absence, and there is one application, and it's listed at agenda item 11.4. 6.1 is deputations, and there are none. Petitions, there are none. And move on to 8.1, councillor questions without notice. Councillor Van Rooyen, did you have any questions?
Yes, Mayor, I have a question to both you and the General Manager.
Thank you. Councillor Beswick.
No, Mayor.
Councillor Diprose.
No, Mayor.
Councillor Viney.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Overton.
No, Mayor.
Councillor Hiskett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. One for Director of Community Services.
8.2 is councillor questions on notice, and no questions have been received. 9.1 is public question time. Any questions received by 3 p.m. today will be read out at the meeting. I don't believe there were any questions received. And 9.2, questions taken on notice. There were no public questions taken on notice from the October meeting. Move on to 10.1, the Penguin Town Centre Master Plan and Strategies. There's a report there. Can I have somebody move? Seconded, Councillor Hiskett. Councillor Carpenter, would you like to speak to this?
Thanks, Mayor. Just on starting off, as other councillors would know, I was sitting on this committee also. And first up, and irrespective of whatever comes out of the report going forward, I must congratulate the people that done the report in Complete Streets. Sometimes you think you don't get value out of consultation process and the professional side of life, but these guys put in numerous hours, 2 or 3 days at Penguin, then back again, and was there all the time and very open to any discussion that sort of come their way. And that was impressive, because I think at the railway station, when you looked at their first, after their first 2 or 3 days down there, with the amount of input they got from the community was unbelievable. And the amount of notes that they took and put them up on the walls showed me that they was there and they was fair dinkum and they were prepared to listen to anybody and everybody, which is what community consultation is all about now. So back onto the report, and I want to make note also, and quite clearly, that we are receiving the report and not adopting the report. So it happened, and there'll be things in there that'll move and will shake out at the end of the day. So we often hear the community members come back and say, why did I bother putting in things? They didn't listen to me anyway, because they just printed off what they had a week ago. Well, okay, that might be true, and that might be said in this case. But again, we're only receiving this report. It'll be the council table, and council will make the final decision. So I want to make that point clear, Mayor, because I think sometimes we might miss things that people think, and individually you might be the odd one out of the 100 people, and it doesn't go your way. What I found out of the report and out of everything that was interesting there was the involvement that the people of Penguin wanted to have, and the involvement and the way they wanted to be sort of part of the process going forward. And we might think, 150 or 200, whatever it was, is not a lot. But really, if you get 7% of your community give you something back, that's quite a substantial amount. And to me, I'd never ever saw where there was really any animosity towards the professionalism that showed and to the outcomes of the report when they come back and went back to the community again. I think people sort of want change, but they also believe that the town centre of Penguin is great the way it is, but you can always move forward. And we all know that, and that's why it was commissioned. The main topic of the process, of course, was the Penguin Rec Ground. The old rec ground seemed to pop its head up everywhere and every time. And if we think initially back, that wasn't even going to be part of the scope, but we brought that in. So that seemed to come up quite often, and we can understand in today's times that living the supply of houses is so short, so that's why it's so important to so many. And it's incredible the number of people you get and do ask you when that is going ahead, and the older demographic wanting to scale down. At Summit Remembrance Day, only live a couple hundred metres away in a big house, but want to move into a smaller house on a flat block, and they can't wait for it to start so they can get something in that area. So there is a lot of momentum out there. Where out of the report, when we go back, where we might land on that, it could be somewhere in the middle of the one 4 years ago and this one today. So we don't know. It might change again and we might see things differently. But I think the report is a great report. It gives you insights into what people would like to see change, what people agree with. There is one thing in there that we've probably got to discuss quite clearly, and that was narrowing the streets. And I didn't mention it at the time to Complete Streets, but if you remember back when we had the centre divide, how much angst that caused, because people thought the streets were too narrow. But when they come up and narrow the streets and slow them down, people seem to accept it this time. So a few years you move on, but it's a different way of thinking what can be done with trees, because we do remember the angst that we had at Penguin when we put that centre divide up the main street, and the angst that caused there for a year or so until it was pulled out. So that's what tells me that we can move, and it's not set in concrete, that we've got to really look at this. I congratulate the community groups that had their input, and whether things happen or not is irrespective. The community group, they've been listened to, and throughout that, out of this strategy now, out of this report, some decisions can be made with good communication and consultation moving forward. And everybody was given that fair chance. And I do congratulate these guys on doing that. I don't see a lot of issue in the report myself in turn. I mightn't agree with the way the old rec centre might be divided up in the report. That's only my personal opinion. I enjoy the fact that they want to create a space down the main street where people want to stop and stay. And I think some of the actions that we've built in there now through the LCRI funds, you know, increasing the playground, making that a destination playground, some street trees, you know, we've got to be careful how much we plant and whatever, some seating and some barbecue areas and things like that. I think will bring people in and make them stay. They'll want to stay. There's always going to be the issue over parking. It's perceived. According to the report, we don't have a problem. We do have some issues down Main Street at peak time, but when you drive around the back of Penguin, there's plenty of places. So all these things will move forward as we go through it. But I firmly endorse the report. It'll be interesting to listen to other councillors and see what they find out of it and what they pulled apart, and see what their take is on that report.
Thanks, Councillor Carpenter. Any other speakers? Councillor Heskett.
Thank you. It is an absolute body of work, isn't it? And I also congratulate the consultants for what they've prepared. I think, again, the fact it needs to be reiterated that we are receiving the report, and from there, that is used to inform the decision making that we make going forward. We've now had that community consultation. It's up for the councillors now to decide whether how they've perceived the community consultation, or how we are approached by the community, and find that balance between the two. One comment that came out from the play score as well as the complete streets is the level of service that Penguin value very highly, maintaining that level of service, or in fact increasing that, and that's something that I think the council needs to be aware of. If we are to increase the number of trees, especially in the town, or the green infrastructure as we are calling it, that with that comes an increased level of service, and that's something that the consultation clearly proved was something very important to the constituents in that area. So we can't just maintain, increase the level of infrastructure and not increase the level of service. They need to be matched hand in hand. But other than that, I think that the strategies from there are some interesting plans and ideas. What I really like is the fact that the timing has worked out very well, that we've been able to actually action some things straight away from a plan. It's so often you see a plan come out, like the old plan that came out for the rec ground, that sat for 5 years. This is nice to be able to sit there and say, we're receiving the report, and also we're going to do this and this right now. That's a very rewarding sight to see within the report presented by the council. So I also endorse receiving the report, and look forward to see what this holds this year, next year's budget, and the budget after as well. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Beswick.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, the other two councillors have spelled out a lot of the items that have been raised, and I'll naturally be supporting this. I did attend a couple of the sessions, one of them with Councillor Carpenter, and I concur that the community really got involved, and it was interesting just to sit and listen to what they saw as the priorities and so forth for around their town. And I think some of the smaller communities, Penguin's not a large town, but I think they get involved in things more than, say, what Ulverston would, and that's not a bad thing. They're interested in it's their little patch. So again, I concur that the guys that have done the report, Complete Streets, have done a great job. As Councillor Heskett said, it's a big body of work, and it's something for us to work through with over the next years, basically, because it won't happen overnight. The rec ground, it's interesting that, as Councillor Carpenter said, that was probably one of the more talked about items when we had a session at the Surf Club. Different opinions to perhaps what's in the report. I may have some different opinions to what they've perhaps proposed as well, but in the end, that's something that we can work through over time. So yeah, it's great to see it get finalised, and as Councillor Heskett said, it's good that we can get some of the items started in this next 12 months. So Thanks, Mayor.
Any other speakers?
Well, yes, Mayor, I would endorse the comments of the other councillors, but I think it's a credit to the town of Penguin, as I understand it. When I read the report, there were 150 representations to these people, so far as what's proposed in the town is concerned, and that's a credit to them that they are involved. I like Penguin the way that it is, but I guess that a lot of these improvements will only enhance the place. And Penguin certainly come a long way to the 1950s and the 60s. And as a matter of fact, I'm now starting to get complaints from people in Ulverston that we're spending too much money in Penguin. So, I mean, it's usually the other way around. So, yeah, quite an argument with a fella on Saturday night about it. But anyway, it's good to see what's happening and fully endorse it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Carpenter, I can't add any more to what's already been said, and you certainly spoke very well. Would you like to sum it all up?
I will do just for a minute, Mayor, and thanks for fellow councillors for endorsing the report. I just want to again reiterate the money going to planning will be to hopefully get the overlay done for the rec ground and get the zoning change to get the planning approval through down the track, Mayor. So make sure that this is not the final end when we do some planning. This is just to get everything in order to move forward. I love Councillor Van Ruin's comment about spending money in Penguin. What a great place to spend money. I really, it's unbelievable. It's paid back tenfold. It's incredible. And if you think about it, Mayor, what's helping drive these little changes and a little bit of beautification and the motivation, the 7-day makeover group. And it all links together. So you can see the makeover group taking parts of this strategy and working on them themselves over time. So big congratulations to them and great outcome. Look forward to working with them.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Move on to 10.2, which is the annual report for the year ended 30th June 2021. Can I have somebody move that the report be approved? Thanks, Councillor Viney, and seconded Councillor Overton. Councillor Viney, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, first of all, I'd just like to say that it's a very impressive, well presented, large report. And I think congratulations must go to the staff for putting it together. They've done a very, very good job of that. Just a couple of the takeaways that are contained within the report are, firstly, the relatively small underlying deficit that is within the report. And I think that's a credit to the council on being able to do that, especially under the COVID conditions we've been operating under for this 12 months. The other one is that there's been a large increase in the net assets of the council, mainly due to revaluations that were done during the year. And I think, like I said, it's a very large report and impressive, and I'm pleased to be able to approve it to council.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Overton.
I'd just like to say I agree with Councillor Viney. The report was very comprehensive and put together very well, and I'd just like to thank all the staff, the General Manager and the staff in the around in the yards that have all put into the work of the Hive, the Queen's Gardens and Penguin Foreshore, and everyone that's done something in the community. Thank you.
Any other speakers?
Mayor, just to follow on with the other two councillors, Chair, unbelievable body of work again, GM, and congratulations. And I can see our audit committee chair thoroughly enjoying this report because it does read really, really well. And as I said earlier, the amount of use some of our public facilities are getting, and I know the figures would have been down the year before, but to see Central Coast bounce back and use some of our rec grounds and some of our buildings and halls after the first year of COVID is really, really promising going forward. It does quantify what council does in the future and make sure that we keep those public assets up to scratch because they are used enormously. and you can only see them growing, man.
Any other speakers? I'd just like to congratulate our staff. I think we've done a wonderful job putting it all together. My only regret sometimes with these things is that not all of our community actually read this report, and I wish every member of our community could read it and see the highs and lows. It's not all positive in there. That, you know, we're very honest in saying, you know, where we could have done better. But I think, you know, to be able to read something like that, I think they'd be fairly proud of the community that they live in. It should be compulsory, but nevertheless. Councillor Viney, would you like to close?
No, thank you, Mayor.
In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? The motion is carried. 10.3 is correspondence addressed to Mayor and councillors. There's a schedule there. Can I have somebody move that be received, please? Thanks, Councillor Beswick, seconded Councillor Diprose. Any queries on that correspondence? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 10.4 is the common seal. I think you've got, no, there's not an updated one, is there? Can I have somebody move that be received? Thanks, Councillor Carpenter. Seconded Councillor Viney. Any queries on those items? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 10.5 is contracts and agreements. I think there is, yes, an updated schedule there. Can I have somebody move that be approved? Thanks, Councillor Hiskett, seconded Councillor Diprose. Any queries on those contracts and agreements? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? The motion is carried. That brings us to the end of general management. Councillor Van Roon, you had a question for the General Manager.
Yes, Mayor. I remember when a group of people came to talk to us about the proposed overpass at Leith. Now, I can't remember whether they were from State Growth or whether they were the consultants engaged by State Growth, but they made it clear that the Minister would be handing down a decision by the end of October. Now, we're now halfway through November, and I'm not aware of any decision that that has been announced as yet. There are a lot of people out there that are anxious about the outcomes, you will understand. And I'm just wondering whether both of you would agree to write a letter to the Minister on behalf of the Council and just point out to him that it was promised that a decision would be made by the end of October. We haven't got one yet. And to find out what his plans are. Is the decision going to be deferred, extra time? And I guess if it was signed by the General Manager and the Mayor, it would attract more weight in itself.
Councillor Van Ruin, I've already emailed the Minister's office to find out when the decision was going to be made. And I've talked to the Department of State Growth, who are answering on the Minister's behalf. The Minister is in the process of making that decision now, and we expect a response to come out either this week or next week. That's how close the response is. And we did highlight, the same as what you have, is that there's angst in the community and that we need to get that out. He needs to get
Thanks,
that out.
Andrew. You are one ahead of me all the time.
I've also spoken with the Deputy Premier and members of Parliament, when I've been speaking one-on-one, and really stressed that we need that decision fairly soon. I think they've all found themselves under quite a bit of duress about this whole situation too. So I think everybody's looking forward to a decision.
Thanks very much.
All right, we'll move on to community services. 10.6, Council acting as a planning authority. Can I have somebody move that report be received? Thanks, Councillor Hiskett, seconded Councillor Beswick. Put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. 10.7 is a residential dwelling, retaining walls and retrospective application for substantial change in ground level, suitability of a site or lot for use or development, dwelling density and location and configuration of development at Brookvale Road, Ulverston. There's a full report there and a suggested resolution. Can I have somebody move the suggested resolution?
Yeah, I'll be happy to move that.
Thanks, Councillor Van Roan. A seconder, please. Councillor Carpenter. Councillor Van Roan, would you like to speak to this?
Well, yes, we fully endorse the report from the planning staff. I have been up and had a look at the property. It's disappointing that the person that is wanting to build a house on site has gone ahead and done all these excavations long before he's had council approval. Also, it has affected the next door neighbour who has been in touch with me, and I understand her concern so far as land slip is concerned. And I think the recommendation that there be a wall constructed before starting work on the house, I said it would alleviate quite a few problems. I mean, we could have, with the weather that we've been having, we could have mini land slips along there, and a wall would be some protection from that happening. It's disappointing that he's done all this work before he's had the approval from council, you know, particularly on something that changes the lay of the land, if you like. It's a fairly big project if you consider the excavations and building the house, and he should have had approval from council beforehand. Would have saved a fair bit of angst, and then the people next door would have had the opportunity of putting in representation, which they have done now. But anyway, I think if that comes about, that retaining wall, it'll be a good outcome.
Any other speakers? Councillor Heskett.
Yes, mostly in agreement with Councillor Van Roon. Just that, as always, this does put the impetus on council to ensure that the actions are followed, the conditions that we've placed on here. It's okay to place those conditions, but we do need to, we are the body that needs to ensure that those conditions are met as well. I think the conditions that are in place are appropriate. Obviously, you know, what we do on our land shouldn't affect the neighbour's land, and this condition that the council has placed should ensure that that doesn't happen. So I just want to congratulate the planning report that was presented. Thank you.
Councillor Carpenter.
Yes, Mayor, much the same as the previous two councils, and I think the final two conditions regarding the walls is fair, and I think it makes all that future angst out of it if that's done before any building goes ahead. I would have, the last one be that the retaining walls must be completed within 12 months from the date of issue of permit. If there was issues with weather and stuff, I would imagine there was some movement there. If not, there's not, but you wouldn't want to be this year doing that. But I think the two conditions are fair, and hopefully they get done and then they move on. Other than that, I'm more than happy with the report.
Any other speakers? Councillor Beswick.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I took a drive up and had a look at the site. The excavations aren't large. They should have still had a permit to do the works prior to. Generally, I'm happy to endorse the permit conditions. I sort of do wonder whether we're perhaps being a little bit heavy-handed, but in this instance, because they've gone and done the works prior, it's probably something that's perhaps warranted, because in the end they might go and not do it later on. Do it not in an appropriate amount of time. So I'm happy to endorse what's been put forward, and I suppose people see that the council actually put conditions on permits when they perhaps haven't been done in the right manner. They might sort of take that into consideration when somebody else might be doing their other work. So thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Viney.
I'd just like to speak in support of the motion as well, mainly because I see the planners have done a good job and that the conditions are appropriate for the circumstances. I believe the conditions are actually required to protect not only the builder but the neighbour and even the council itself. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Van Roen, would you like to close?
I think it's all been covered there, thank you.
Thank you. Then I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Move on to infrastructure services, 10.8. Sorry.
Investment for community services. Does that fall there?
Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry.
Happy for the question to be taken on notice, but the question is, can the council explain the lack of communication to the Penguins men's shed regarding their ongoing lease issues since the 31st of August? And can the council ensure that this is speedily resolved?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hitt. I can ensure that the lack of communication will be speedily resolved. I can't answer the rest of the question. I'll take on notice.
Thank you.
Now move on to 10.8, the Greening Central Coast Strategy. Can I have somebody move? Sorry, we have an amended motion there. Councillor Carpenter, would you like to?
I'd like to move an alternate motion, or I would say it's an alternate motion. The Greening Central Coast Strategy dated October 2021, a copy being appended to and forming part of the minutes be adopted, in which will be used to inform our current policies and plans when being reviewed. As circulated me.
Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Van Roen. Councillor Carpenter, would you like to speak to this?
Thanks, Mayor. I thought it was going to be a seconder there for a minute. It's another one of these strategies, Mayor, that we've got to have in place to make sure all our plans and policies underneath this overarching strategy is reviewed in accordance with what council wants long term. Strategy's long term, visionary, and where we want to see our community be in whatever years before it's reviewed. I'm glad tonight that we've got it to the table. I think it allows our staff and our council to move forward in our other policies and plans to review them, and make sure that we're a consistent approach to the Greening Central Coast Strategy. When you read through it all, there's a lot of info there, and a lot of our community mightn't think that we're short of trees or we're short of this or short of that. But Greening Central Coast Strategy could be ground covers, covers on the foreshore, any size plant or whatever. It's not all about trees. And so we must always make that clear. It's not about going along planting 6 metre high trees here and everywhere. It's about trying to get that cover across our Central Coast community. And even though when I looked around the other day, when I had to come to the basketball stadium to do some work, and you look back up through West Ulverstone up at top of Moore Street, you think back there, that's beautiful when you look across the top of that. But when you look south, easterly, up on top of another subdivision up there, you think, well, what happened to the trees or a little bit of green infrastructure there? It's just block houses upon houses. So we spoke about it a while ago on a planning permit that we put through a meeting or two ago about the value of certain trees or certain plants in certain areas. And I also look at a green strategy as the well-being of your community. There'd be nothing worse than living in the middle of a desert, I wouldn't think. And we're so fortunate to live where we live, where we can grow all these plants of all this colour and whatever we want to do. And if we can maintain that and manage that to make sure we've got it for the future generations, and all about climate change and all about that sort of stuff just comes in with it. But it's such a beautiful place to live because of their aesthetic of our surrounding areas. And that's what I like about this strategy. It'll keep some of that. We'll build on it. We'll create good plans and policies going forward from the strategy. So I'd like the rest of the council put it up for endorsement.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Yes,
Councillor Van Roen.
Mayor, I am in favour of the concept of trees being planted. I like the idea. However, I found that report when I first got it was very rigid, and I needed an explanation on the actions that we're going to and the policies that we are going to implement. We have discussed it earlier this evening before the meeting informally, and I do feel a bit better about it now. As I said before, you're welcome to come and have a look in the backyard. I've got it planted out behind the house with native shrubs. One of my daughters insisted that I do that. You may or may not be aware that she was the host at a Greening Australia program on television. And they filmed her in her native garden, so she put the pressure on me to do the same. But look, it is nice, especially this time of the year when they're all out in flower. And yeah, I like it. But whether we like it or not, trees are a controversial thing. They mean different things to different people. And not everybody wants trees planted in their yard. I had concerns about being implemented into our planning scheme, that it will be necessary for people to have a tree in a yard. You know, blocks have got smaller and smaller. Houses have got bigger and bigger. There are some properties where there will be no room for a tree, and we need to be flexible. And I would hate to see that we implement this policy with an iron fist. I've been assured this evening that that won't be the case, that a lot of the policies will come back to council for endorsement. And I would like to see members of the community have input into this. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have got ideas about trees and where they should be planted and so on. And I think we should welcome the opportunity for them to come forward and express their views. And hopefully we will be able to do that. So I'm going to endorse this strategy. And look forward to the further actions in implementing this. So,
Any other speakers? Councillor Hiscott.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I too am happy with the slightly changed wording in the amended motion to ensure that some of the decision making on the planning and policies is maintained and controlled by the councils and the elected representatives. I think it's good to note that the discussion that we had informally around that is an overarching strategy. That the statements in this will be used only to inform the policies, plans, and strategies, not used individually for decision making by itself. Because we've seen too often where overarching strategies are used that we don't put enough full input into. They're meant to be only overarching, and then later down the track in a couple of years' time they're used to justify things that they weren't initially intended to justify. So it's good to have that assurance that this is, you know, to drive and drive the policies that we've talked about. I think in general the concept is I think we can all agree that the concept is great. I think, you know, having more green infrastructure certainly does make a more livable town. But it'll be good to see what the strategies and the plans and policies that are driven from this strategy look like when they're presented to council. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Beswick.
Thanks, Mayor. Like Councillor Van Rooyen, I came along tonight not happy with this policy at all. I'm happy with the changed wording, but if I'm still on the council or I'm still around the table, I'd like the residents to be assured that I'll be, you know, if their interests in this space. I love trees, but I don't like trees planted in inappropriate places. I think we need to respect when we're planting trees in our public spaces, which is council space, but it's also the community spaces, that we need to do it in the right manner. A lot of people say that we don't own a view. We don't own a view when we've got private land on one side or the other. A view that somebody's had for many, many years living in an environment is value to their home, and it's value to their mental health. Like in a lot of these issues there, it talks about health and well-being. I know people that have got stressed because they've had people go and plant trees, and the council plant trees in their environment without any consultation and so forth. So health and well-being works both ways. It's not always what one person thinks it's good, another person might not. I feel that this document is very Queensland, perhaps centric, where more in the tropical areas as far as shade, because I would want to get as much sun into the northern side of my house as I could, and the strategies and the policies, a big part of the policies that get generated out of this for street trees is really critical, because even though we might say we've got deciduous trees that might be on a nature strip, talking 2.7 metres high, a deciduous tree still only lets through, I'd like to know, I tried to find out today, but I couldn't, perhaps 50% of the light that is your free heat that comes into your house. If you've got a house that's only 4.5 metres, 5 metres off your front boundary, and you've got a tree that's on your nature strip, that tree could be 5 metres high. So it's also going to, in the winter time, shade your solar panels if you've got solar panels on your house. So there's a lot of critical information in the background with our policies that we need to work on, and I'm happy to endorse it based on the rewording that we've got. As Councillor Carpenter said, we've talked about this a lot earlier, and yes, it's a bit of a work in progress, but yeah, I'll go along with it at the moment, but that's where we end up. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Viney.
Yes, I'm only bringing it up really because Councillor Bezel brought it up, but I was actually happy with the greening Central Coast strategy because I recognised it as a high level strategy, and I knew that there were other plans and policies that would come under it. But in saying that, I'm actually happier that the motion now links to those policies and plans actually coming back to council over time. So I will be supporting the alternate motion.
Thanks, Councillor Viney. Any other speakers? I'm really pleased to have actually been involved in the working group on this strategy. I must say there's been a really good group of community members who have had a lot of input into this, and I think it actually gives us the basis of going forward with better policies and plans on our trees. I think we're really lucky that I think overall in the Central Coast we had something like 58% of canopy cover, which was that's sort of looking at the Dial Range and those areas a little further back, and that wider view of the Central Coast. And many of our areas have lots of beautiful trees in them. But we also have areas where there are hardly any trees, and this strategy has sort of looked at the balance and where we need to spend a little bit more emphasis on greening. And I would particularly welcome some of the discussion that we're going to have around the planning scheme, because while some of our older areas have lots of established trees, some of our brand new subdivisions are absolutely denuded. There is not a tree in sight. And I think there's got to be a balance. I like to point with having, we don't want big trees and dangerous trees. We don't want to, we don't want trees that aren't suitable for streetscapes. Development there, the trees are planted, the nature strip trees are actually planted out before building is commenced. And a lot of those are only shrubs. They're only bushes. They're not great big tall trees. They're often just native trees that are, that are going to give a bit of shade to people on pathways and nature strips. That's some really good things that can come out of this. And I ask all of the councillors to support it, and let's work with this and see how we can develop a really great strategy and get that balance right between what's appropriate and what's not. But yes, more green, regardless of its height, is always a good thing. Councillor Carpenter, would you like to close, please?
Mayor, and thanks for all the councillors for the discussion on this, which was excellent to have. I just want to point out a couple of things, and I think when you develop a strategy and you want policy and the plans to work, in this instance, you need community buy-in. And really, all council will do will facilitate the purchase of the trees or the planting and the maintenance and so forth and so on. If you look at one of the objectives, under Objective 3, develop landscape guidelines for nature strips and encourage community ownership. Now, it'll work if the community want to own it. It won't work if the community doesn't want part of it. Because if we plant trees and shrubs and whatever where the community doesn't want them, you know what's going to happen to them, don't we? They're not going to be there very long. So I think these sort of paragraphs inside this strategy will help develop our policies and plans. And you go to the Objective 4, develop a green infrastructure steering group. Now, the way I read that steering group would be part of council staff plus part of community. So everybody can have a bit of an input. And then support, encourage and celebrate community groups involved in green infrastructure initiatives. It's green infrastructure initiatives. It's not about 10-metre high trees. I think we've got to get our head around what we see as green infrastructure. And that's all about learning and communication going forward. So good discussion. Get on the table. Hopefully it's put through, Mayor, and then they can move forward from there. Thanks, Mayor.
We'll see. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Move on to 10.9, statutory determinations. There's a schedule there. Can I have somebody move that be received, please? Councillor Viney and Councillor Hiskett. Any queries on those determinations? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? The motion is carried. Public question time, but we had no questions, did we? 11.1 is meeting closed to the public. It brings us to the end of our open part of the meeting.